Good day everyone, welcome to Math with Teacher Justin. On today's topic, we're going to talk about solving zeros of a quadratic function using factoring. Before we proceed to our video tutorial, make sure that you already know how to factor polynomials. Now, I have a video tutorial on getting the factors of a polynomial. I will place the link in our description box below. Okay, so please check my videos on factoring polynomials. Now on to our video. Here are the steps in solving zeros of a quadratic function via factoring. First step is for us to transpose all terms on the left side of the equation if necessary. Then step 2 is to combine like terms. And step 3 is to factor the left side of the equation. And then equate each factor to 0. And last step will be to solve the values of x for each factor. Okay, so here are some examples in solving zeros of a quadratic function using factoring. Let's have an example. So for example, we're going to find the zeros of this quadratic function. So first step is for us to change the function notation to 0. Then let's make sure that all terms will be on the left side of our equation. And now we proceed to factoring. So let's factor 3x squared minus 12x using common monomial factoring. So our factor will be 3x times the quantity of x minus 4. Then after factoring, we can now equate each factor by 0. So we have 3x is equal to 0 and x minus 4 is equal to 0. Then let's solve for the value of x for each equation. So for the one on the left, we divide both sides by 3. Therefore, x is equal to 0. Now let's proceed to the equation on the right. So we transfer negative 4 to the other side of the equation. We will have x is equal to 4. Now the zeros of our quadratic function will be 0 and 4. Let's have another example. So for example, we're going to solve for the zero of this quadratic function. So first step is for us to change the function notation to 0. So we have x squared minus 36 is equal to 0. Then we factor x squared minus 36. So the factor of x squared minus 36, we can apply difference of two squares. So we will have the quantity x plus 6 times the quantity of x minus 6 is equal to 0. Now we equate each factor by 0. So we have x plus 6 is equal to 0 and x minus 6 is equal to 0. So let's solve the values of x of each factor. So for the one on the left, we just transfer positive 6 to the other side. We will have x is equal to negative 6. And for the one on the right, we have x minus 6 is equal to 0. So let's transfer negative 6 to the other side. We will have x is equal to 6. So the zeros of this quadratic functions are negative 6 and 6. Alright, okay, let's have another example. So for example, we're going to find the zeros of this quadratic function. So first step is for us to change the function notation to 0. Now, let's get the factor of our polynomial. X squared plus 10x plus 25 has a factor of the quantity x plus 5 times the quantity x plus 5. Then from there, we can now equate each factor by 0. So we have x plus 5 is equal to 0 and x plus 5 is equal to 0. Let's solve for the values of x of each equation. So we have x plus 5 is equal to 0. Let's transfer positive 5 to the other side. So x is equal to negative 5. Ayan. So on the one on the right, we have x plus 5 is equal to 0. So let's transfer positive 5 to the other side. We will have x is equal to negative 5. So since we have the same values of x, the zero of our quadratic function will just be negative 5. Alright, let's have another example. So for example, we're going to solve for the zeros of this quadratic function. So first step is we're going to change the function notation to 0. Now, after changing the function notation to 0, we're going to factor our polynomial, the one on the left. Okay, so in this case, we're going to use factoring quadratic trinomial case 1. So we get the factor So the factors are the quantity x plus 6 times the quantity of x minus 3. Now, we equate each factor by 0. So we have x plus 6 is equal to 0, x minus 3 is equal to 0. Then, let's solve for the values of x of each factor. So on the left side, we have x is equal to negative 6. And on the one on the right, we have x is equal to 3. So the zeros of this quadratic function will be negative 6 and 3. Alright. Okay, let's have our last example for today. So for example, we're going to solve for the zeros of this quadratic function. So first step is we're going to change the function notation to 0. So we have 3x squared minus 4x minus 4 is equal to 0. Then we get the factor of our polynomial. To factor our polynomial, we will use factoring quadratic trinomial case number 2. So the factors are the quantity 3x plus 2 times the quantity x minus 2. So we equate each factor by 0. So we have 3x plus 2 is equal to 0 and we have x minus 2 is equal to 0. So let's solve for the values of x of each equation. So for the one on the left, we have 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. So let's transfer positive 2 to the other side. We have 3x is equal to negative 2. Let's divide both sides by 3. We will have x is equal to negative 2/3. That will be the value of x. Now let's solve the second equation. X minus 2 is equal to 0. So we transfer negative 2 to the other side. We have x is equal to 2. Now, the zeros of our quadratic functions are negative 2/3 and 2. Alright. When solving zeros of a quadratic function using factoring, it is very useful in solving the zeros of a quadratic function if your quadratic function is factorable. Now that you already know how to solve zeros of a quadratic function using factoring, it is your turn to try it. Please click the link in our description box below in order for you to test your skills. That's it for today. Again, I'm Teacher Justin. Goodbye, God bless, and stay safe. See you on my next video. Peace!